think man has eternally been obsessed with wanting to know where we come from, what is the meaning of this soap opera that we participate in, and what happens after we die.
And that's part of the problem in the modern world, I think. We're trying so hard, striving so hard, we're so ambitious to be independent and powerful. When people talk about being empowered, it kind of concerns me, because I don't think we're going to find this soul power, this very deep-seated power, in any effort to balance the control issues with people. That's striving too hard. And in fact, I think there's a paradox at work, that we would probably feel more power in our lives the more we could give it up.
The greatest battles of life that we ever fight are usually fought in the silent chambers of our own soul, and usually daily.
And that's what I try to get across to people. How you beat life and its pain is not by living forever or accumulating a lot of money, but of how you confront challenges and adversity. That's what we're talking about. If you ask the world, is life fair, the majority say no, life is not fair. My concept is that life is totally fair because everybody complains, but it's difficult. That's a different statement.
This question of how do we do it, how do we do it, how do we do it is a completely bogus one at this point. And for most people, it is a completely hypocritical one. They've been to enough lectures and they've read enough books that they know. So they keep asking how, because they're trying to avoid the actual practice. I heard somewhere a quote from Pascal: all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
The mythopoetic tradition says that you do not do the work of finding out what your destiny is, of finding out what your pattern and your desires are in the world. You give yourself over to the world through a tremendous amount of attention. Whatever attention you can give, you give that. And the world comes alive to such an extent that it actually comes back and finds you.
People are eagerly turning to a growing number of new thinkers and philosophers for alternative directions, for healing, health, wholeness, to achieve their human potential. Inner space, the ultimate journey.
Anthropologists have found that cultures began inventing religions for themselves at the same time that they began creating pieces of art. In other words, the desire for transcendence is intimately connected with the desire for creativity. It is just as essential to who and what we are. So forever, mankind has been seeking a way. When I say we have been inventing religions, that doesn't mean we invent the religious experience. We give expression to the religious experience. So obviously from the beginning of time, we have been searching for this. So the answer to the question is no, I do not think that our hunger today is any different than it ever was. I think it's probably a greater hunger, though, because in this century particularly, we live in a world so alienated from the sacred experience.
I think what is going on today is deep pain, P-A-I-N, and that it's everywhere. And that at the forefront of much of that pain is just the need for survival. And the world has changed its logic system. We have a new standard, we have a new bar. The global economy has opened up everything. And the bar of quality has gone higher and higher and higher. And you can't fake quality. It has to come out of high-trust cultures. And you can't fake high-trust cultures any more than you can talk yourself out of problems that you behave yourself into. It has to come from real, deep trustworthiness. There's no other way.
Hysteria is the dominant theme of our society today. It's the fear of change, and yet the fact is that change is the most dominant theme of our civilization. We have more change in one decade than we have in centuries in previous times. And people find that this rapid change leads to unpredictability in their lives. And this lack of predictability, lack of control, lack of outlets for frustration, this leads to the anxiety and the angst that you see in our culture today.
If you say, can someone change their life, my statement is yes. I mean, most of us need to hurt in order to change. Not because somebody suggests it, but we say, I'm in pain, I don't like it, maybe I'll change. And I'd say maybe, but if someone comes to me with a complaint about their life, I say change your life. If they say, well, how do I change my life? I mean, I'm stuck in a job or my insurance. I say, you don't like it and you can't change it, then change your attitude towards life. So if someone is miserable, that's them and their responsibility and their participation and their choice. Because I don't care, again, whether you're in prison or have parts of your body missing or have an illness. If you want to be happy, then choose happiness. I mean, that may sound like an absurd statement, but talk to survivors of concentration camps, a whole host of other things. They are talking about their choice. And that's what we have. Ultimately, only one choice. My feelings, my attitude, my mood. If I want to be miserable, I can be miserable. That's very easy. And I mean, I don't have to change my wife. I don't have to change my children. I don't have to change my job. I can just choose to be miserable. And on the other hand, I can keep all those things and wake up every day and say, I'm choosing happiness. And there's a very simple statement I read the other day. If you're here to contribute love, you'll find happiness. If you're here to get something, you will always be suffering because you'll never get enough. And I meet people angry when they die because they never got enough and they were so nice to everybody. Then I could have said to them, then don't be so nice to everybody, you know, or it's okay to ask for your needs.
The purpose of our lives and the high which we seek is not to be found from the material, but rather from something inside of us that then we give birth to. In other words, the love in our hearts, the compassion. That is what is the high we seek, the experience of that love. And ultimately we come to recognize that nothing in this world can give it to us. It can bring us pleasure, but it cannot bring us ultimately the joy that we seek.
I think there's a longing right now for the soul and for understanding what it means to live out your own pattern. That each of us has a pattern, that there's a pattern in the world, the greater world, and that our pattern somehow fits exquisitely, that I as an individual have my own way in the world, and that there's a way of fitting, and we're tired of not fitting in a way. Many of our organizations, our countries, our institutions, our marriages just aren't large enough to hold us anymore. They're just not large enough to hold us anymore. And so there's a way in which no matter how large an organization is, no matter how vast, it's not vast enough to hold even one single human soul. And I feel like we're all recognizing that now, and we all want our lives back now from our institutions, our organizations, our relationships. Not in a selfish way, but in a greater self way, in a way in which you feel you're able to give your gifts and they're not constantly being stifled all the time. And it just seems to be in the air these days. It seems to be the zeitgeist of our time that we've actually come to a threshold where we feel it's possible to actually do that.
Most people think in terms of quick fix changes. You know, they want something now, and so they get hung up on some particular idea or fad. It's kind of like cotton candy that you taste, you know, and it tastes good, but then it evaporates. It doesn't seem to have any substance that has enduring and permanent value. So I think that people's minds are too focused upon a quick fix. They're too focused upon what's the answer. They're not willing to pay the price in deep introspection and reflection, in really confronting the deeper issues and the questions of their life.
I lived in Hollywood for a long time, and there was this myth, I don't know if the story is true or not, that I think it was Lana Turner, the American actress, was discovered sitting in a drugstore or something like that. And I think a lot of us grow up with this idea that that's what's going to happen to us, that we're going to be discovered. And I think maturity includes the recognition that nobody's going to see anything in us that we don't see in ourselves. Stop waiting for a producer, produce yourself. Because if you have this idea that somebody's going to give me the chance to show what I can do, then what that implies to me is that you won't have been practicing. So even when you, quote, have the chance, the light's on you, what do? I think you have to practice being the person that you know you can be, even when people aren't looking, because the universe is always looking.
We see what we seek. The ultimate purpose, the ultimate motive that you're trying to serve will affect how you see life. And how you see life will affect your whole response to life. It's called a paradigm, your view of reality. But our view of reality is shaped primarily by our deeper motivations, our deeper desires. What is it we are really about? Someone said, when man found the mirror, he began to lose his soul. See, the point is, he became more concerned with his image than with his self. We don't, in a sense, invent, we detect our sense of meaning. We don't discover it, we uncover it. It's in us already. And everyone has unique gifts and unique capabilities, and they also are in very unique need situations. And it's the marriage between those gifts and those needs that represents the contribution, the service potential. So you have to look outside, but you also have to examine your own heart, because that's where you'll find the mother lode is.
It's funny, isn't it, that it's so difficult to love ourselves. I think maybe the problem there is the word self. That's why I like the word soul. It may be possible or easier to love the soul rather than oneself. Maybe there is something about the very idea of looking at oneself and paying so much attention to oneself that is revolting, or it is difficult, and maybe it should be. Because that's not the way to be in this world, to be introspective, I think, to always be gazing at oneself and trying to work on the self. Again, the traditional teachings from all over the world say that if you lose yourself, you will gain it. If you lose your soul, in a sense, you'll gain it in a way. I mean, lose yourself, certainly. And this loss of self-consciousness, and I think in our terms today of trying to improve the self, which is what we're doing most of the time, if we can lose that and discover maybe that it is narcissistic, that means neurotic, you know, narcissistic. It means that we have lost touch with the soul. We have substituted self for soul. That's almost a definition of narcissism. Now, soul is something bigger, broader. It reaches out into the world around us and the people around us. And it is not a looking at oneself in a reflexive, self-contained way. It's rather discovering that oneself is out there, that who I am is in my relationships and in my family and in the work I do. I see myself in the work that I do. And that is not narcissistic. That is finding oneself outside oneself. And then we have a chance, I think, to love oneself. We can love our soul because we see it as separate from ourselves.
Most people say things like, someday my day will come, and when they realize they have a limited number of days, that's when they really get into action. We don't live lives, we live roles. More people die on Monday morning and have heart attacks Monday morning, commit suicide Monday morning. So we don't like what we're doing. And then, as one woman said, my disease gave me permission. So I can read letter after letter from people saying things like, I took time to smell the roses. Oh, you know, I really put in a rose garden. And these were people who were expecting to die who didn't. Now, we all die, but so many people have never lived. And I think that's why the disease becomes a gift, that they really begin to live their life. And as one man said, there's a stupid cliche, time is money. He said, time isn't money, time is everything. And so when you see a limited amount of time, you begin, as he said, to spend more time with the things and people you love. If you're reading a page in a book and it isn't important, you skip it. And you really begin to focus on that. And at the same time, as I said, people will straighten out relationships, quit jobs, move from where they didn't want to live in the first place, and then wonder why something nice happened to them physically as well.
Life is not so much about making ourselves better as it is about relinquishing all the illusions and the blocks to our greatness that are bred into us in this world. I mean, if you go through a preschool or kindergarten or elementary school, you can see the obvious capacity for greatness in children. And you can see how our systems, educational and social, dampen children's spirit. I mean, the irony is we think kids go to school to become great. We send them to school so that the system can just beat it out of them. And we've got to get out of that denial. We've got to stop that hypocrisy. Admit to ourselves that that's what we do. If we were more concerned about keeping children centered in their joy and less concerned about making them learn geography, if we were more concerned about teaching children to love and to live in compassion, the world isn't falling apart because children don't know how to spell. The world is falling apart because adults aren't thinking for themselves. But I think that has less to do with spelling, which is not to say spelling is not important, less to do with what we say education is about, and more to do with the fact that people are just so internally bound, so internally unfree. And when that spirit is suppressed, there's no genius. So it's not that some people are geniuses. Oh God, I heard a line. It was Buckminster Fuller. It was something like, geniuses are just people who had good mothers. I love that. And he would know.
So I think one has to have an alert appreciation of the roles one's playing. And many times in Western societies, the ego is in fact confused for self-esteem. People have an extremely poor self-esteem of them, in that they have a very poor opinion of themselves because they've never experienced that part of themselves that is immune to criticism, that is unfearful of any challenge, that feels beneath no one, and yet has love and simplicity inside it. There is a lot of confusion about self-esteem and self-ego in Western societies for the simple reason that the whole domain of psychology and behavioral sciences has lacked an essential component, and that is spirituality. Without a spiritual experience, you can never have true self-esteem because you don't even know what the self is. You're confusing it with the ego.
People escape into different psychological fads of self-esteem. They are ignoring the fundamental roots of the problem. For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root. I mean, imagine a person who is duplicitous, see, inwardly torn and deceitful, learning positive mental attitudes and better ways to dress and better ways to present oneself and to manipulate other people toward your own ends, or to build self-esteem through the various social psychological theories that are very popular today, but they're fundamentally duplicitous. It's flawed. Same thing with service. The essence of happiness is that it is a byproduct. You never go after it directly. It always is a byproduct of something that you contribute, that you give, that you make a difference, say, that you add value, that you serve, you contribute in some way. And to me, those are the two missing ingredients of much, not all, certainly not all, but of much of the literature and the focus on how do you get self-esteem, how do you get happiness.
I always say the sickest group I see are the children of today. Go into a junior high school or a high school, and there's such low self-esteem and self-worth. They are afraid to love, and if you ask them why, they say, well, I could be rejected. That's where parenting comes in. If you feel loved, you don't worry about rejection. You go out and love the world. If somebody doesn't want your love, you don't go home depressed. You say, they didn't want it. But you have a sense of worth. Most of the children today are depending on somebody else to let them know that they're okay. That's sad. And therefore, they don't risk loving. They're more likely to be destructive than loving. But what I saw was that love, joy, again, they're physiologic. I mean, if you spent 15 minutes laughing, do I need to tell you laughter is good for you? How does your body feel? If you play for a couple of hours, you know, and lose track of time, at the end of that time, if somebody reminded you 2 hours went by and you said, 2 hours? I thought it was 5 minutes. What is going on in your body during that time? And to me, love is probably true unconditional love, that when you're giving that love, you're probably at your healthiest of any of those states. And anybody who's ever done volunteer work knows that. And if you've spent time working for someone out of love, and then at the end of the couple of hours of that work, how do you feel? Wonderful. You go home elated. I always compare it, because people, when they relate to people, say back to animals again. A bird is brought into your house by one of your children. It's been injured by a car and it can't fly. So you take it in and you take care of it, and a few weeks later it's capable of flying, and you teach it again and it flies off. Everybody in the family is just standing there. It's so wonderful to watch this bird fly again. You don't look for a card in the mailbox, and you don't wait for a phone call saying, thank you for helping our bird. You know, you are rewarded by the act. And I think that's what people have to learn, that that kind of act, that kind of love, helps the person as well as the recipient. And if you do studies, you find that people who volunteer, do out of love, live longer, healthier lives.
There's a marvelous few lines by an ancient Chinese sage called Wu Wei, where he says, why are you unhappy? Why are you unhappy? He says, because 98.75% of everything you say and all that you do is for yourself, and there isn't one. 98.75% of everything you do and all that you say is for yourself, and there isn't one. Well, when he says there isn't one, what he's meaning is there's a much greater self than the self we usually use to question the world and to say, what is my life? Then that this self, this sense of soul, actually comes out of your relationship with the world. It's not just you by yourself figuring out what you're going to do with your life. You're actually going to give yourself over to something much greater, which is actually called life. And that life will come back and find you.
My underlying statement is life is a labor pain. If you use the pain to give birth to yourself, you're doing something worthwhile. Most people are going through pain that has nothing to do with giving birth to themselves or living their life. It's what everybody else wanted them to do. And Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, said he was sitting in a restaurant one day listening to a father argue with his boy, and the mother said, let him do what he wants to do, and the father said, I have never done anything I wanted to do in my life. That's what we're talking about.
I don't personally believe that there has to be pain in order to experience pleasure, by the way. I know many people do. Carl Jung said there's no coming to consciousness without pain. But when I look at my daughter, when I look at little children, and the pleasure, the sheer joy and glee, I never truly knew in my heart the meaning of the word glee, till I saw a baby laugh, a toddler laugh. And I don't think that their joy is dependent on their having been through pain. I think there is a deepening of our gratitude for joy when we have known pain. I do think that.
You don't have to give up your pain. You should just give up your suffering. Pain is a very normal component of life. Without pain, we wouldn't have the experience of pleasure. So we shouldn't even attempt to give up your pain. Life is a flow between the banks of pain and pleasure. That's what makes experience one of contrast. But when you get attached to your pain, and then of course that's a different thing altogether. That's called suffering.
So if the symptom, if the problem, the complaint is that, that I'm inferior, that I feel inferior, if we stay with that, then maybe we have to explore the possibility that we have to find a kind of inferiority that doesn't hurt us and doesn't undo us. We have to find a more soulful, you might say, inferiority. Now that may seem very odd, especially in a world that hates inferiority. But let me tell you what I mean. Inferiority, if we follow that through, could be a way of, the feeling, if we follow it through, could be a way of discovering our lower, you might say, lower humanity. We all strive to be so high all the time. We want to be educated so highly. We want to know so much. And yet, you know, the myths, the great mythologies of the world warn us against being too ambitious about knowledge, that we're going to be destroyed if we strive too high and too far that way. The mythologies and religions really tell us that it's important to be inferior, to discover our foolishness, our ignorance. The mystics talk about this all the time. So there's a kind of inferiority that is not a literal destruction of oneself. Rather, it is a lowering of expectation, a lowering of ambition, so that we live and discover the value of things like not knowing everything, of failing in so many things, of getting sick now and then, of being emotionally unstable now and then. All of these things, you know, the various things that weaken us and bring along with them feelings of inferiority can be very fruitful to the soul. More fruitful than the superior moments when we think we know what we're doing and that we're on the right track and we haven't failed, we've succeeded. Those can be even more dangerous to soul.
We have tremendous preconceived notions about the way life should be, and much of our raising in life, you know, by our parents and our organizations in the form of educational systems and things, reinforce it, which is that I exist when everything is on the up and up and I'm growing and I'm successful and I'm doing well in the world, and I don't exist when I'm fading away, when I'm dying, when I'm failing. And this is true both in the way others see us and the way we see ourselves too. It's as if we only agree that we will go out at night when the moon is growing larger for the first half of the month. And in the second half of the month, we will not go out because it's fading away. And we will certainly not go out for those 3 nights of the month when there's no moon at all. Just too frightening. I wrote a poem about this actually called Faith, written when I had very little faith. But I started in the first line was, I want to write about faith. I want to write about faith. I was just getting my foot in the door. I didn't know what I was going to write about faith, but I wanted to write about faith. I want to write about faith. And then suddenly, this interior image of the moon arose inside me. I want to write about faith, about the way the moon rises over cold snow night after night, faithful, even in its fading from fullness, faithful even in its fading from fullness, slowly becoming that last curving and impossible sliver of light before the final darkness. But I have no faith myself. I do not give it the smallest entry. What I overheard myself saying in that poem was, what would my life be like if I had equal faith in the part of me that was fading away as the part of me that was growing? That was actually a radical question. That there's a way in which we feel as if when things are going wrong and things are not going right, that I actually don't exist. There's something wrong with me, and therefore I have to do things to put it right. Now, if you look at the way life is and actually works, half of life is growing and becoming, and half of life is dying and fading away. And if we cut ourselves off from the whole fading side of the cycle, we actually cut ourselves off from half of ourselves.
Well, I don't know if I can, you know, put my finger on the most fundamental fear, but I really believe that a common one is how well I stack up with others. What my position is. where am I in the pecking order? How I compare to other people. And it's a kind of ego need that's very prideful. It feels very superior in some settings and maybe inferior in other settings. But when people grow up with this shame-based identity, or with what I call a comparison-based identity, where often shame or comparisons, emotional rewards and punishments attach those comparisons, they gradually lose a sense of themselves and who they are, their own identity, their own soul, their own worth, their own preciousness.
The problem is the ambition, you know, that we're so ambitious to do so much and to know so much and to achieve. I think giving up those ambitions is a way of letting go of some of the anxiety that's connected to them. And what's the alternative? To just wallow in your life, in your problems? No, it's not that. I use the word care, which is sort of halfway between wallowing and being hyperactive. Caring is active, and yet there's a soft activity in it. So we have to care for our lives all the time and not judge ourselves so much. I think a lot of anxiety comes from judging ourselves, saying we have to improve, we have to be different, we have to be like somebody else. We're so identified with the collective, so identified with one group or another, or the spirit of the times. And this is especially true of people in spiritual practice. They're very identified, very collective. And these people can be extremely moralistic in their own way, thinking that everyone should eat the same way, or they should meditate, or they should do this or that. But from the soul point of view, we trust the deep interior of the individual, and that individuality may appear in horrible diet, in a horrible diet, you know, compared to the purer diet, or in a horrible style of life. It may seem terrible compared to somebody else's. And I think that tolerating and allowing that individuality to emerge is the ultimate cure for anxiety. To really trust yourself, to trust that whatever is coming up from there, even though it's very raw and you don't just want to act on everything that emerges into consciousness, but whatever comes up, it has value and validity. And that kind of trust and intimacy with oneself is the base for living without anxiety. That's how I would describe the openness that is the life of living close to soul.
And this is something I also say to people now, that if you don't want to be a victim, when you run into things and you think you are going to be a victim, that this is beyond you, what do you do at that moment? Well, what you do at that moment is say a prayer. Now, the prayer isn't, God, cure me, or God, give me more money. It's, God, show me. And this has nothing to do with religion. Religion is a problem, okay, for a lot of people, the rules that go with it. But you can say, God, my collective unconscious, my intuition, please help me, show me the way. And then you have a dream, or you bump into somebody who you haven't seen in 5 years and they tell you something, or you suddenly have a thought, and that's what begins to happen. This is in us, there's resources, and what we need to do is just have faith in ourselves and listen to this inner voice, and it'll guide you.
Part of the reason we have so much difficulty with these urgencies is our fear of failure around them, that you could lose everything. If you tried your life and it didn't work, where else would you go, you see? Oh, the actual experience is very different, but it's this fear of failure. And yet, all the time, it's just as if, I feel that the universe is looking at us saying, listen, 15 billion years of evolution, and there is no other creature exactly like you anywhere in the universe or the world. There is no other human being who can fail exactly in the way you can fail. No one has, the artistic ability to fail, to mess up in the way you can mess up. No one can fall on their face in the way you can fall on your face. No one can fail like you can fail. No other part of the world has the ability to fail in the way you can fail. And you are quibbling. You are quibbling between success and failure. This is a kind of story that would be told to a young boy or girl who asks the question, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? What do I do when I can't find my way around? This was a real question for a Northwestern Native American child growing up in the climax cedar forests of the Northwest. It's also a real question for a street kid in Philadelphia or Toronto, or for a middle manager in a large corporation? What do I do when I've lost sight of what my life is about? I've given myself over to something greater, but I've lost myself in it completely. And so the child asks the elder, what do I do when I'm lost in the forest? Here's the answer that the elder gives. The elder says, stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. Listen. The forest breathes. It whispers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. The forest knows where you are. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. You must let it find you.
How do we get in touch with our own awareness? By silence, by settling down the turbulence of the internal dialogue, which squeezes out the connection between us and our spirit. Franz Kafka, the great writer, said it very elegantly. He said, you need not do anything. Remain sitting at your table and wait. You need not even wait. Just listen. You need not even listen. Just learn to become quiet and still and solitary, and the world will freely offer itself to you to be unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet.
I think if a person really wants to live a life that is creative, where they tap into their deepest passions and have a sense of fulfillment about what their life really is, that the most practical thing I know is to develop a personal mission statement. I'm serious, to take the time to do it, to get into nature, to get into a reflective state, and to write. Writing crystallizes thinking. Writing distills your learnings. And you write, what is my life really about? Now you have to use a lot of self-knowledge. You have to explore your own heart. You have to sense where your gifts are.
It's difficult for people to change and confront their habits because they become bundles of conditioned reflexes that are constantly being triggered by people and circumstance into predictable outcomes of behavior. It's called the hypnosis of social conditioning. And we are influenced by the hypnosis of social conditioning. Some people can break out of it. It's an interesting group of sages and psychotics and geniuses. But I think the only way to really radically transform a person's belief and to get them out of conditioned response is through education.
You have to have the ability to step in on yourself at any time, to see what's happening, you stand apart. You have to use these 4 unique human endowments. It's like bringing into yourself having 4 counselors who care about you. Self-awareness, that you can examine your scripts. Imagination, that you can envision a better state. Conscience, your inward sense of what is really right and what is wrong. And then independent will, the power to act on the other 3. What powerful counselors, and all of us have access to them. We're not a product of our past. We're a product of our chosen responses to our past and to present circumstances, see? And through the use of those endowments, you can bring about changes in anything.
Norman Vincent Peale talked about the power of positive thinking. I always worry about the term. I think Norman understood it. He grew up with a wonderful mother who said, Norman, if God slams one door, further down the corridor, another will be open. So he had a different view of the world. But what I worry about is a lot of people say, oh, you want me to think positively? Okay, everything's fine. And they're not. I mean, they're putting on an act or a performance, and so the stuff is still going on. I like the word peace of mind, that you are at peace knowing you can handle what comes and what is.
You move out of fear through one way only, and that is serious spiritual practice. You move out of fear through the consistent practice of forgiveness, through consistent meditation, through consistent prayer and prayerfulness, through consistent devotion and dedication, and mental and emotional discipline. Period.
I mean, just imagine if I were a surgeon, the education that would go into my hands and into the nervous system and how that connects with the brain and the knowledge base and so forth. Well, what about the education of the conscience, the inward sense of a moral compass, see? That involves the totality of a person. It's requiring much more disciplined and rigorous and careful living and serving until the conscience becomes honed and sharp and sensitive. And then it's like you live out of a different world. So life becomes a true adventure. It's kind of the inward journey in order to make the outward journey. And it probably starts with the outward need, start with, see? So that you have the desire for the inward journey. Then you go outside to meet that need.
Most people have the idea that doing what's best for you is a kind of a chore, and it's boring. Western medicine has never developed the technologies to motivate people to do things for themselves that are actually profoundly enjoyable, that can become addictions, literally healthy addictions, that you're really addicted to the experience of joyfulness and health and vitality and life.
Once again, we are responsible, no one else, for mining the gold in our own experience, which is to say that it is up to us whether or not we choose to seek the deeper drama of what's really happening in our life experience, all of which has to do with the universe constantly nudging us to become the men and women that we are capable of being.
I personally think the key to longevity is the experience of timelessness, is the experience of carefreeness, is the absence of the hysteria of our society, is the absence of fear about not living too long. When you relinquish your attachment to the whole process, paradoxically, you have it. My personal observations of people who live extended lives, and more than that, extended, happy, carefree, joyful lives, is that longevity becomes a side benefit of their spirituality, of their spiritual experience.
I respect the human body. It's quite a marvelous thing, and I think in the next 10 or 20 years we will be amazed at what we learn about the body, about our souls, about our thoughts, and what they do to ourselves and to each other. And it's, you know, really beginning to get very exciting to explore this and to understand that when I have a thought, my body is transformed by that thought.
People believe that aging is irreversible, that it's a one-way street, that if you're 60 today, you can never hope to have the biology of somebody who's 40. And yet there are a number of studies that show that interventions at the level of the environment, at the level of the physical body, at the level of the emotions, the intellect, the ego, and ultimately at the level of the human spirit can in fact reverse all the biomarkers of aging that have been studied so far. How you think, how you behave, and what you eat, what your relationships are with your friends and family, what your relationship is with yourself. All these factors can influence the aging process by as much as 30 to 50 years, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So I think the first thing you need to do if you want to reprogram the clock inside is to get rid of all your false assumptions, because they're no longer based on scientific fact. They're superstitions.
The body really responds not only to feelings and emotions, but images and visions. So meditation, prayer, relaxation techniques can affect your state of mind. They therefore affect your body. And the things that I began to list for people were, you know, keeping a journal, get the feelings out, looking in the mirror at one's naked self, which really relates to dealing with issues of esteem and self-worth and acceptance and self-love. That's important. And the other, doing volunteer work and so forth. So you can make a list of what's good for you, see. I call them survivor personality characteristics. Take people who have survived a war, you know, a concentration camp, a life raft, a disease, and say, what do you like? Just take somebody who's 90-year-old. They'll tell you. I mean, there's nothing, you know, that's very difficult to accomplish except their state of mind. That's difficult.
I think the work I'm doing is now being recognized by mainstream medicine. I'm part of a mainstream institution at Sharp Healthcare. We are the largest healthcare providers in the state of California and probably now in the US. So I'm part of a very mainstream institution that is at the cutting edge in medicine, and they believe that mind-body medicine is an idea whose time has come.
In that meeting of the world, and you as you find yourself in that world, there will be an indication, a kind of sign, an appearance of your destiny in the world. And when I say destiny, we don't necessarily have to talk about Julius Caesar or Napoleon or Madame Curie. We're talking about whatever your pattern is and whatever the beauty of your pattern is in the world. And it may be as simple as looking after your house in a way in which you've created a marvelous, soulful environment.
What happens is that people gradually get so immersed in what I call the thick of thin things, because they're all urgent, that they lose a sense of perspective, a sense of proportion, a sense of wisdom. And they often end up climbing this marvelous ladder of success efficiently, getting right to the top rung, and then discovering it's leaning against the wrong wall. I have lost the most precious, the most significant relationships of my life. I have compromised my health. I have compromised my integrity. I mean, what's it all about, Alfie? You know, it's because they don't take the longer view. People get into daily planning. All the important things deal with longer frames, not daily. If you're in the daily planning, all you're doing is prioritizing your crises. And soon that beats you up. It wears you out. You have no energy left for other things. Get out of daily planning.
And that's why I think it's so important for every single person to be creative in some way. Not in the artist sense, but simply manifesting what you feel deep inside and who you are as an individual, to be able to manifest that, and to be able to see the manifestation in the work that we do satisfies the narcissism. It actually transforms the narcissism that we have into a love of soul. You might say a love of oneself. I'm not sure what it is that keeps us from doing that. I suspect that one of the reasons generally why we don't live a more soulful life is that to live from that place, from a deeper place, and let ourselves manifest and just be out there, means that we have to be individuals, that we can't give up the responsibility, for one thing, for being an individual. I think there's a lot of weight with living the soulful life. I mean, weight in the sense that what you do counts, it matters.
Ultimately, we decide which world we value. If what you're interested in is making it in the world, you can fight and struggle to make all kinds of things happen. You can even learn the rules of the game by which you can probably manifest those things you want. What you will ultimately find, however, is that those prizes in the world aren't what ultimately bring us joy. They just don't. So sometimes I think with people, why don't you go on and fight that fight and do all that? Because then you'll be ready to start. Then you'll see, well, I got all those things that supposedly make me so happy, and they don't. And then you're ready, I think, to seek for the real pearl, the real prize, which isn't an external experience, it's an internal one. And you know that fighting keeps you from the prize, because the prize is an experience of profound peace. So if you're in a struggle mode or in a fight mode, by definition, you are obstructing your own experience of the prize. Once again, the irony of all this is that when you stop struggling, stop trying to make things happen, they actually flow into you more easily. Because the abundance of the world is magnetized to a serene presence.
The soul needs to be nourished. That's what we have to do with soul, is feed it. And we don't need to solve its problems or to understand it or to know its structure. We need to feed it. And the question is, what does it want to eat? What is its food? It's a very old, ancient question. What is the food of the soul? That imagery is very ancient. And what I learned from the past writings about soul, is that the soul feeds on, generally speaking, on two things: time and eternity. It feeds on everyday life, so that the things we do every day, the simplest choices and the simplest things that we go about doing in our ordinary day-to-day life, very important for the soul. Sometimes the mind seems to disregard those small things, but the soul doesn't. But the other thing is that the soul needs eternity all the time. Not an idea of eternity, but it needs an experience of eternity every day. The experience that is outside of time. And what does that mean? Well, if you are stopped, if time is stopped sometime, especially the activity of your life is stopped or arrested by a beautiful vista of some kind, a sunset, a mountain, a lake, an ocean, whatever, or just a flower that you see, usually it's nature, or you might be stopped by a painting, or by a sculpture, or a beautiful building, or a dress someone is wearing, or a tie, or a face. This simple contemplation of the soul is the way the soul gets the eternity that it needs, and it needs it every day. So that if we're going to care for the soul, one of the things we have to do is find ways to give the soul its eternity. Give it its momentary contemplation.
Spirituality is discovering a domain of awareness which is beyond the ego. It is a domain of awareness where we experience the sacred, or where we experience the universal, where we lose the experience of time. This is all spirituality. The spirit is a real force. It's abstract, but it's real. It's more real than gravity and time, which are also forces of nature.
You know, this whole notion of eternity, psychologically, is fascinating. What eternity theoretically is God's time, and the only place where it intersects with time and space as we know it is in the present moment. So to say we live in eternity, full life, the fullness of life is found in eternity, means the fullness of life is found in moments when we are neither neurosing about the past nor in anxiety over the future. Surrendering the future, I know for myself, it's a lot easier than surrendering the past. We miss so much opportunity to create a better future by not showing up fully in the present. And theoretically, everything we need is in the present. Every person who is in front of us, every opportunity that we need is in front of us. If we can focus on the present and live as nobly there, as compassionately, and as full of contribution as possible, the past will heal by itself, and the future will take care of itself.
I think that we're here to contribute love. You decide how you want to do that. That's all. That's the simplest thing in the world. How you want to contribute to the world. And then go and do it. I have done it in many ways. And I know that they all satisfy me as much as being a physician. So I don't have to be a doctor to contribute to the world. What keeps people from doing it is fear. They won't be loved. They won't have enough money. What will the neighbors think? How do I look? That's the problem. I don't worry about those things anymore. Thomas Moore, who writes about the soul, therapist, said that the people in touch with their soul are individual, eccentric, and mad. Now, what he means by that, I mean, individual, you understand, you're yourself. Eccentric, meaning you do things in your way. And mad, he's talking about passion and love. Same thing I see. See, I'm not afraid to be childlike, to have humor, to say no. I just live my life. I'm not worried about other people's opinion. That is not what's important to me. And I'm not, see, I'm here to love the world. So that people don't misinterpret and say, well, boy, he's selfish. No, I'm here to contribute to the world, but I'm choosing how I do it. So I have right to be who I am, that's all.
We're constantly going to life for another contract, you see. We come up and we say, okay, I want to be a poet. I want to go full-time as a poet, or I want to go full-time as a painter. But I also want that job offer on Monday morning so I can do it and sustain it, you see, at the same time. And I want X amount of money, and I want this government grant to do this. In other words, I want assurances. And life keeps coming back and saying, there are no assurances, there is no immunity. You belong like everything else. Nothing is safe from me. And so we say, right, I'll come back next year. And we come back again. We say, let's have a look at that contract again. You say, there's nothing there. It says I have complete safety if I take this path.
I'd say I know that everyone's in pain, that everyone here doing this program, everyone watching it, I mean, we all have our difficulties. So if someone does upset me, I don't spend time hanging on to that. 5 minutes later, if they showed up and said, can I have a hug? I mean, I've had a terrible day. That's part of why I behave the way I do. Yeah, you can have a hug. And so I keep relating to people in that way. And I'd say I'm probably the toughest judge of myself of anyone, that I am not happy with me. My job here is to be more loving. And I would say the greatest advice I can give people, which I got from, again, from Ashley Montague, when I said to him, I want to be a more loving human being, he said, well, then act as if you're more loving. And that was the greatest, simplest advice in the world. If I want to love you more, I act as if I love you when we meet. And this is not to fool you, you understand. This is to truly get me to be that way. So as I meet people, act as if you love. And if we all acted that way, we become lovers. Of course, the people you react to and act towards become more loving because they see how you're acting. And people that I had difficulties with over the years, his simple statement was, when that person comes in the room, act as if you love them. I do that. And I watch them change, and I change, and our relationship changes. The thing that you have to remember is, as William Saroyan, the writer, said, we're all pathetic actors. So it might take you a whole lifetime to really act as if you love. All right, forgive yourself along the way, and that's something I have to do too.
But there's also another place as a mature adult where you have to treat life on its own terms. And you must see it as a fiery kind of energy that will not only nourish you and take care of you, but will kill you as soon as look at you. And that this is a real energy. And if you try and ignore this, you will only have idealism and utopianism.
So, yes, I think that if we were to pay attention to what's happening in our immediate vicinity, what's happening in our life right around us, those things that are of concern to the soul, like marriage and family and friendship and neighborhood and work, home, place, all of these things, if we look around and see that it needs attention, then the thing to do is to just realize that soul requires everyday attention. It's not a matter of now getting it fixed and then going on. It's a matter of realizing that maybe my lifestyle's got to change somewhat so that I can have more moments of quiet or more moments of gardening, if that's what soul is looking for whatever mysterious reason, or more time with the family, or what else? You know, all the many possibilities that are there. I think we have to realize that care of the soul is ongoing, it's forever. It's not a matter of fixing a problem now and then forgetting about it. It's a way of life. Now, what if we return to the view of the cosmos, that with planets and stars and suns and moons and darkness and distance, vastness, and imagine that when you just felt yourself as a being, that you are so deep, that there is so much there, so much potential, that the only way to imagine it would be to see it as the universe itself, in this traditional image. Now imagine letting that life come into your daily experience. Just imagine that there's sort of a gateway or a hole or an opening where some of this soul life can come through and enter into your life. Well, it's immense. The possibilities are immense for what we could be. And they're incredible in their implications and the potential creativity in that. And all we have to do is make the opening, open up and let it come out. And this whole universe, things we didn't even know we were capable of, would appear. And I mean this of anybody, not just the extraordinary individuals who manifest themselves so clearly, but anybody. We're all capable of all that incredible amount of potential.